Bad news for motorists from next month as the petrol price is set to go up again. The Energy Department has announced that petrol will increase by between 58 and 67 cents a litre from Wednesday. Let's get a reaction on this and speak to DA's spokesperson, Kevin Mileham. Kevin, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Not good news. Talk to us about what's on the horizon as far as
Well, it's as you say, not great news for motorists. It's not great news for our economy. The impact of fuel price increases on the cost of living is enormous, and it affects more than just public transportation and motorists. It affects the cost of the food we buy, because obviously that then is impacted by the transport costs of that. It affects the electricity cost, people who are running generators, but also Eskom. Eskom spends more than 20 billion rand a year on purchasing diesel to keep the lights on as far as they're able. So it has an enormous impact on the cost of living.
Now, is there anything that the government isn't doing or is doing to prevent this continual scaling up of cost of fuel? I mean, the number of price increases that we've had, despite the one or two times where it's gone down, have been numerous over the last several months.
So the two big influences on the cost of fuel in South Africa are, first of all, the international crude oil price, and secondly, the rand-dollar exchange rate. Now, the rand-dollar exchange rate eased somewhat in the March review period, but the price of oil increased. So as a result, we see the price of fuel going up, and the recoveries that South Africa made weren't enough to keep the fuel price where it was. So bottom line is that the price of fuel went up. But we've been calling on government for years now to comprehensively review the fuel pricing model. We are concerned that there is way too much in the way of taxes included in the fuel price, particularly the general fuel levy, which is basically just a tax on fuel that goes into the bottomless pit that is the South African government, and the second being the road accident fund levy. Government did undertake a desktop review about a year or so ago, but they didn't do a comprehensive deep dive into it, and they certainly didn't look at removing those two elements of the fuel pricing model. And then we need to look at how we reach the price that we do, and is it the most appropriate mechanism for South Africa? Is having a regulated price point a good way of doing business? Does it not inspire competition to allow a more free-flowing price and allow retailers and wholesalers to set their own prices and thereby incentivize competition?
So before we start pointing fingers at the South African government on what they should or shouldn't be doing, let's take a look at what's happening across the continent or in SADC. Are they paying similar amounts for fuel as we are, or is it higher or lower?
It varies from country to country, and in some places it's lower. I mean, just across the border in Botswana, which purchases their fuel from South Africa, the price is significantly lower because there aren't as much in the way of government taxes included in the fuel price. So it varies from place to place.
Now, there has been talk, certainly in government quarters, about OPEC and production costs, and certainly geopolitical tensions in Ukraine allegedly contributing to some of these costs. Is this fair?
Indeed it is. So the major oil-producing countries have a consortium called OPEC, the oil-producing exporting countries, which basically determines the price of oil. They determine that by deciding how much to produce, how much to extract from the ground at any given time, and how many barrels to refine. That's where the price of oil comes from, and they can vary that up or vary it down. So they can increase production or decrease production. Obviously, if South Africa was able to produce its own oil, we would be in a very different situation. The reality is that there is oil and gas off our shores that has been discovered. Certainly the Brolpata and Leipat fields are indications, as well as oil off the west coast of South Africa near the Namibian border. So there is opportunity, but these things take time to develop and to get into a production-ready state. And until we are self-sufficient in terms of extraction and production of oil, we're not going to be in a position to dictate to the rest of the world what price we should pay for their oil.
Kevin, where are we currently buying our diesel and petrol from?
We buy it on the open market, so it comes from all over the world. A significant amount from the Far East, from the Singapore market, from the European market in the Mediterranean, but it's from all over the world.
Now, when you look at oil-producing countries on the African continent, Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Libya, Egypt, Congo, Gabon, South Sudan, Chad, and Equatorial Guinea are some of those countries that are currently producing oil at various levels. How much of a factor could this be if we were procuring our requirements from countries on the continent?
It's difficult to say. As I said, the price of fuel is determined by the crude oil price, and the crude oil price is set on the international markets. So it's not about purchasing it directly from one country or another, because they're all contributing to what that price is at the end of the day. So if you're buying crude oil from the Far East, or you're buying it from an African country, you're still going to pay the same price for the crude. Where the difference comes in is in the transport costs to get it to and from South Africa. And that's something that we should be seriously looking at, is where are we buying it from in order to minimize those transportation costs, the delivered cost to our shore.
Now, looking beyond immediate price adjustments, what is the DA's stance on long-term energy policy and its implications on fuel pricing?
Well, first of all, as I said earlier, we've got to look at a comprehensive review of the fuel pricing model. That's vital. Secondly, we need to look at how do we secure a pipeline of supply to South Africa. In other words, how do we make sure that there are no obstacles in the way to ensuring that our country has fuel whenever it needs it, that we have the strategic reserves that we need in order to mitigate any potential fuel shortages. And then we need to look at how do we achieve those efficiencies and economies that will allow us to drive the price of fuel down. And some of that may well be to look at procuring a more local source of supply. Some of it may be to produce our own. And there has been a lot of talk around the involvement of the National Petroleum Company. Well, there's work that needs to be done in order to ensure that petroleum company delivers on its mandate and produces fuel for South Africa at a price that South Africans can afford.
Kevin, you talk about looking at options. I'd like to imagine that as the DA, you would have explored these options already. So what you should be giving us at this juncture is this is how we are going to address those challenges.
Indeed. Obviously, that the challenge is that we're not in government at the moment, and a lot can happen in the next 60-odd days to change who is in government. So if we were to come into government, those were the factors that we would be looking to implement in the immediate short term. So I can't say we will do it today because we're not in government, but I certainly can say that if we were in government, those are the steps that we would be taking to address the fuel crisis in South Africa, the energy crisis.
What I'm saying is I haven't heard those steps. Would you emphasize the steps? You've talked about the things that we need to look at. What are those things specifically?
So, again, we would review the fuel pricing model. That would be an initial first step. We would look at how that fuel pricing model is determined and provide a better model that is less reliant.
But I think our listeners would like to hear what that. I mean, we can't talk about we would review. I'd imagine if you are pitching yourselves as the next government, then you've already done the review process. So let's hear where the challenges are. Where is
some of that? Yes, absolutely. So as I said, one of the things we would be looking at in the immediate short term is to scrap the road accident fund levy from the fuel price. We would look at scrapping the general fuel levy from the fuel price. Those two factors alone would reduce the cost of fuel by about 30%, and that would have a significant saving for the consumer on the road. Obviously, that needs to be factored then into the budget process, because those funds then come into the money that government has to do other things. But we believe that there are significant areas of saving that can be implemented where those taxes are not required. So, yeah, that would be a step that we would take immediately.
30% obviously would be a huge saving for motorists, particularly where the economy is doing what it's doing right now. Now, how does the DA plan to address the broader challenges facing the energy sector, including transition to renewable energy and reducing dependence on fossil fuels?
I'm glad you asked that question. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to prioritize what our electricity and energy needs are. Our economy is incredibly dependent on electricity, and it's been highlighted as the single biggest handbrake on our economic growth. So what we would need to do is to ensure that we can upscale the generation capacity in South Africa as quickly as we can. We need to look at how do we bring new generation online as fast as possible. The first thing that we need to do is make it easier for businesses and residents to install solar on their homes to reduce the demand on Eskom. The second thing we need to do is we then need to look at how do we provide transmission infrastructure for all the other generation capacity that we want to bring online. How do we provide that generation infrastructure so that we can evacuate the power from where it's being generated to where it's needed? That's a second significant factor. And then the third is then we need to look at how do we revitalize Eskom's ailing generation fleet. What do we need to do in the longer term to make sure that we have a supply of an Eskom supply of generation that is reliable? Because the biggest challenge that we've got right now is unplanned outages from Eskom's side. And then all of this needs to be backed up by storage and batteries and pumped hydro and the like to ensure that we have dispatchable power when we need it, whenever there is increased demand.